It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of someone or other of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. "But it is," returned she, "for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it." Mr. Bennet made no answer. "Do you not want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife impatiently. "You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it." This was invitation enough. "Why, my dear, you must know, Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England, that he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately that he is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of next week." "What is his name?" "Bingley." "Is he married or single?" "Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4 or 5 thousand a year. What a fine thing for our girls." "How so? How can it affect them?" "My dear Mr. Bennet," replied his wife, "how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I am thinking of his marrying one of them." "Is that his design in settling here?" "Design! Nonsense, how can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes." Bingley. He had always intended to visit him, though to the last always assuring his wife that he should not go. Until the evening after the visit was paid, she had no knowledge of it. It was then disclosed in the following manner. "I hope Mr. Bingley will like it," said Mrs. Bennet to her husband as they drove along. "We shall see," was his answer. Mr. Bennet had always prided himself on his humor and cleverness, and his quickness in conversation. He saw the humor of his wife's impatience and made it amusing to himself. The long-expected evening at Meryton arrived. It was a public assembly, and all the neighborhood were present, eager to see the new gentleman, Mr. Bingley. Miss Bennet's sisters were excited and curious. Jane Bennet, the eldest and very beautiful, was naturally calm and charming. Elizabeth Bennet, intelligent and witty, observed everything carefully and was quick to notice character. When Mr. Bingley entered, he was immediately warmly welcomed. He was good-looking, agreeable, and lively, and everyone was charmed by him. He had paid special attention to Jane, speaking kindly and dancing with her. Elizabeth noticed his manners and the way he interacted, forming her first impressions carefully. Meanwhile, Mr. Darcy, his friend, appeared proud and reserved, refusing to dance with anyone except his own circle. This made a strong impression on the attendees, and soon rumors about his pride began circulating. When Jane Bennet had been 2 or 3 days at Meryton, her mother began to think that Mr. Bingley must soon make some kind of declaration of his intentions. She could not bear the thought of her daughters losing such an opportunity, and she was always on the lookout for any sign of encouragement. Elizabeth, meanwhile, observed Mr. Darcy carefully. She noticed his reserved manners and the pride that seemed to mark every word and gesture. She did not like him at first, but she found his intelligence and composure worthy of attention. Mr. Bingley, on the other hand, continued to show marked attention to Jane. He was always lively, cheerful, and polite, and he seemed genuinely pleased in her company. The more Elizabeth saw of him, the more she appreciated his kind nature and easy manners. The contrast between Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy was clear. One was open and amiable, the other reserved and proud. Yet Elizabeth began to suspect that there was more to Mr. Darcy than first impressions revealed. The days passed with visits, dances, and gatherings, during which the Bennet sisters were watched closely by neighbors, and the social chatter about wealth, manners, and marital prospects increased. Jane's sweetness and beauty attracted admiration from many, while Elizabeth's sharp wit and keen observations set her apart. Every gesture, every conversation seemed to hint at the beginnings of romance, misunderstanding, and the social intrigues that would follow. The next day, Elizabeth and Jane received a visit from their neighbor, Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte was a sensible young woman, calm and practical, who often gave Elizabeth advice about society and marriage. Charlotte talked about the importance of observing people carefully before forming judgments. She remarked on Mr. Bingley's cheerful manners and Mr. Darcy's reserve, hinting that appearances could be deceiving. Elizabeth shared her impressions. She found Mr. Darcy proud and disagreeable at the Meryton ball. Jane, however, was optimistic about Mr. Bingley's attention and tried to see the best in everyone. Charlotte also warned them about the pressures of society. A woman must be cautious. Good sense and prudence are as important as beauty and charm. The conversation left Elizabeth thoughtful. She admired Jane's calm and trusting nature, but wondered if her own sharp perceptions might make life more complicated. The day continued with visits and interactions among neighbors, giving each sister opportunities to observe character and manners, which were considered crucial for forming opinions about potential suitors. Soon after, the Bennet family received another invitation to a social gathering at Meryton. The sisters were eager to attend, especially to see Mr. Bingley again. Jane was calm and composed, attracting admiration from everyone she met. Elizabeth, always observant, noticed Mr. Darcy's continued reserve and the growing interest of Mr. Bingley in Jane . During the assembly, Mr. Bingley danced often with Jane, showing his pleasure in her company. Mr. Darcy danced very little, refusing invitations, which sparked curiosity and some gossip among the attendees. Elizabeth noted the contrast. Mr. Bingley is so agreeable and lively, yet Mr. Darcy appears so proud and cold. This difference in personalities became a topic of conversation among the guests. Some admired Mr. Bingley's charm, others were intrigued by Mr. Darcy's aloofness. The Bennet sisters continued to learn the rules of social interaction, where every smile, gesture, and word could unsignal interest, approval, or disdain. By the end of the evening, Elizabeth reflected on her observations. She began to understand that first impressions were often misleading, and that character could only be judged through careful attention and time. A few days after the assembly, Mr. Collins, the Bennet family's cousin and heir to the estate, wrote a letter announcing his intention to visit. Mr. Collins was a pompous and self-important clergyman, eager to secure the favor of his wealthy patron, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. He wrote formally, praising Lady Catherine and emphasizing his duty to the family. Mrs. Bennet was delighted. What a fine man to help us secure matches for the girls. Elizabeth and Jane exchanged glances, skeptical of his character. When Mr. Collins arrived, he talked excessively about Lady Catherine, showing his obsequious nature. His behavior was formal, awkward, and self-satisfied, amusing Elizabeth and puzzling the rest of the family. Despite his oddities, Mrs. Bennet hoped he would marry one of her daughters, securing both wealth and status. Elizabeth, however, began to see the absurdity of relying on such a man for security, while Jane remained polite and gentle in her interactions. The visit of Mr. Collins marked the beginning of new social complications, introducing a character whose pride and obsequiousness would influence events in unexpected ways. The next day, Mr. Collins visited the Bennet family again, and his peculiar behavior became more apparent. He spoke constantly of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, praising her wealth, power, and generosity. He flattered Mr. Bennet excessively, trying to gain favor, but often ended up amusing Elizabeth with his pompous manner. Mrs. Bennet, of course, continued to encourage the idea of him marrying one of her daughters. She suggested that he should consider Jane. But Elizabeth quietly observed that he lacked sincerity and charm. Mr. Collins, oblivious to subtle hints, proceeded with his long-winded speeches and exaggerated politeness. Elizabeth reflected on the visit. He is a ridiculous man, yet he takes himself so seriously. How different he is from anyone I have met. Jane, as always, treated him with politeness and composure, hoping to avoid any rudeness. By the end of the day, the Bennet family realized that Mr. Collins' presence would be a source of constant entertainment and mild frustration, particularly for Elizabeth, who valued sense and authenticity over social climbing. Elizabeth's observations were interrupted by the entrance of Charlotte Lucas, her sensible and pragmatic friend. Charlotte listened politely to Mr. Collins's discourse, occasionally nodding in agreement, though her mind clearly worked on practical matters rather than romantic ideals. Elizabeth admired Charlotte's ability to maintain composure, even as she quietly questioned the suitability of Mr. Collins as a companion. Charlotte, unlike Elizabeth, valued security and social stability over passionate affection. She regarded Mr. Collins's proposals and opinions through the lens of practicality, considering what advantages might be gained rather than what feelings might be involved. This contrast between Elizabeth's idealism and Charlotte's realism highlighted the different approaches to life and marriage among the young women of Meryton, setting the stage for choices that were as strategic as they were personal. Mr. Collins, oblivious to the subtle judgments of his listeners, proceeded to outline his intentions regarding the future of the Bennet estate, speaking with the same pompous certainty as before. Elizabeth found his lack of self-awareness both amusing and exasperating, while Charlotte took careful note of the practical implications. The conversation meandered through topics of inheritance, social connections, and the ever-present influence of Lady Catherine, each point revealing Mr. Collins' obsession with status and duty. Amidst this, Elizabeth could not help but reflect on her own values, contrasting them with those of her friends, and recognizing that choices in love and life were rarely simple or universally agreed upon. As the visit drew to a close, Mr. Collins expressed his hope that Elizabeth would seriously consider his advice regarding her future prospects, speaking as if her agreement were merely a formality. Elizabeth, with polite firmness, listened and responded without committing herself, all the while inwardly resisting his presumptuous tone. Charlotte, on the other hand, quietly weighed the benefits of such a connection, her mind calculating the security it might provide. The Bennet sisters, each in their own way, were left to contemplate the balance between desire, duty, and pragmatism, understanding that the path ahead in matters of the heart and society would demand both discernment and courage. Once Mr. Collins had taken his leave, the Bennet family exchanged quiet reflections on the visit. Elizabeth could not hide her amusement at his absurd self-importance, while Jane, ever gentle, sought to see the good in his intentions. Charlotte calmly remarked on the practicalities of his proposals, reinforcing her reputation for level-headedness. The contrast among the women, Elizabeth's spirited idealism, Jane's kind optimism, and Charlotte's prudent realism, painted a vivid picture of the varied approaches to life and marriage in Meryton. Each sister, in her own way, was learning that navigating society required both wit and wisdom, and that matters of the heart were intertwined with considerations of propriety, advantage, and personal happiness. That evening, as the Bennet family gathered in the drawing room, conversation naturally turned to Mr. Collins and his peculiar mannerisms. Mrs. Bennet expressed her hope that one of her daughters might accept his proposal, seeing only the social and financial benefits, while Elizabeth and Jane exchanged knowing glances, silently questioning their mother's practical but somewhat short-sighted enthusiasm. Charlotte, ever composed, offered measured advice, suggesting that careful thought should guide any decisions regarding marriage. The differing perspectives within the room underscored the tension between personal desire and societal expectation, leaving each young woman to ponder how best to navigate the delicate balance between affection, prudence, and the pressures of family and community. As night fell, Elizabeth retired to her room, reflecting on the day's events with a mixture of amusement and concern. She considered Mr. Collins' sycophantic devotion to Lady Catherine and his self-important demeanor, questioning how anyone could be persuaded by such shallow reasoning. At the same time, she admired Charlotte's pragmatic approach, recognizing that while she herself valued wit and genuine affection, not all were guided by the same principles. The contrast between her own ideals and the practical strategies of those around her served as a reminder that choices in life, particularly in matters of marriage, were rarely straightforward or purely emotional. Meanwhile, Charlotte quietly contemplated her own future, weighing security and social standing against the uncertainties of romantic attachment. She knew that practicality often dictated the decisions women in Meryton had to make, and she resolved to approach life with careful calculation rather than whimsy. Elizabeth, aware of her friend's reasoning, felt a mixture of admiration and mild unease, realizing that their differing perspectives on love and duty would continue to shape their conversations and influence the paths they might take. The night ended with a gentle hum of reflection, each young woman silently preparing for the choices and challenges that lay ahead. The following morning brought a renewed energy to the Bennet household. Conversations resumed with lively debate about social proprieties, the influence of Lady Catherine, and the behavior of Mr. Collins during his visit. Elizabeth, ever perceptive, noticed subtle shifts in her sister's attitudes. Jane more contemplative, Lydia slightly more flirtatious, and Mary absorbed in her books. Charlotte maintained her characteristic calm, offering advice when asked and observing quietly when not. The atmosphere reflected the delicate interplay of personality, ambition, and societal expectation, each woman navigating her place within the intricate web of Meryton society. By midday, Elizabeth and Charlotte took a brief walk in the garden, the fresh air providing a welcome contrast to the stifling formalities of the drawing room. Their conversation turned to the prospects and pitfalls of marriage, with Elizabeth voicing her concerns about superficiality and Charlotte emphasizing the importance of stability. Though their views diverge, both recognize the wisdom in considering multiple perspectives, understanding that life's decisions often required balancing heart and reason. The walk ended with a mutual acknowledgement of friendship and respect, each strengthened by the other's insights, and prepared to face the challenges and choices that the coming days would inevitably bring. Elizabeth, though amused by Mr. Collins' pompous discourse, found herself increasingly aware of the contrast between his rigid adherence to social expectation and her own desire for genuine understanding and affection in marriage. She exchanged glances with Jane, who quietly smiled, recognizing Elizabeth's subtle disapproval. One afternoon, the Bennet household received an invitation to a local assembly, a social gathering where acquaintances met, danced, and conversed under the watchful eyes of the more experienced members of society. Elizabeth felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, knowing the evening would reveal the manners and inclinations of those she had yet to observe closely. The assembly, Elizabeth's attention was immediately caught by the behavior of Mr. Darcy. Though he remained distant and reserved, there were moments of keen observation and polite engagement that suggested a complexity beyond his haughty exterior. Elizabeth found herself both irritated by his pride and intrigued by his discernment. Meanwhile, Mr. Bingley displayed an easy sociability, drawing the admiration of those around him. His attentions toward Jane were gentle and sincere, sparking whispered commentary among the guests. Elizabeth noted the difference between Bingley's openness and Darcy's formality, pondering how character and station could influence the course of human connection. The evening progressed, the patterns of social interaction unfolded. Flirtations were delicate, manners were carefully measured, and opinions were exchanged with subtle wit and observation. Elizabeth, in her usual manner, observed keenly, her mind balancing amusement with thoughtful reflection on the complexities of propriety, affection, and pride. Returning home, the Bennet sisters discussed the events of the evening with lively conversation. Elizabeth, though entertained by the assembly, remained contemplative, considering the lessons learned about pride, prejudice, and the interplay of character and circumstance in society. Jane, ever gentle, spoke warmly of Bingley's kindness, while Elizabeth's mind lingered on the enigmatic figure of Mr. Darcy and the challenges yet to come. Elizabeth's daily walks became a time of reflection. She pondered her impressions of those around her, particularly Mr. Darcy, whose aloofness both intrigued and vexed her. She often discussed her thoughts with Jane, whose gentle perspective offered balance to Elizabeth's more critical observations. At the same time, news from Meryton brought excitement and gossip. Soldiers stationed nearby drew attention, and among them, certain young men quickly became the subject of curiosity and admiration. Lydia's enthusiasm was boundless, while Elizabeth and Jane observed the situation with measured interest, cautious not to let frivolity overshadow propriety. One afternoon, Mr. Darcy unexpectedly engaged Elizabeth in conversation while she strolled in the park. His words, carefully chosen, hinted at admiration, but also conveyed a subtle tension. Elizabeth, determined to maintain her dignity, responded with polite yet guarded remarks, leaving both parties aware of an unspoken challenge between them. Meanwhile, Mr. Bingley's attention toward Jane grew increasingly evident. Their interactions, though restrained by social conventions, suggested mutual affection. Elizabeth noticed the gentle warmth between them and quietly hoped that happiness might favor her sister. Yet she remained vigilant, aware that social pressures could complicate even the most promising connections. The Bennet household was frequently visited by friends and acquaintances, bringing news and opinions from the surrounding area. Each visit offered opportunities to observe character and propriety. Elizabeth found herself developing a keen sense for discerning sincerity from pretense, a skill that would prove essential in navigating the complexities of society. Mr. Collins, undiminished in confidence, continued to make suggestions and offers that reflected his practical but narrow-minded worldview. Elizabeth, growing more certain of her own principles, politely resisted his advice, reinforcing her commitment to independent thought and the careful consideration of character above social advantage. Elizabeth could not help but notice the difference between Mr. Darcy's reserved manner and Mr. Collins's obsequious behavior. While Darcy's pride often made him appear distant, there was a sincerity in his speech that Elizabeth found difficult to ignore. Mr. Collins, on the other hand, seemed almost robotic in his deference to Lady Catherine, offering compliments that lacked warmth or understanding. Elizabeth's reflections were interrupted by the arrival of Charlotte Lucas, her sensible and pragmatic friend. Charlotte greeted the Bennet family with calm courtesy, immediately engaging in conversation about everyday matters rather than romantic ideals. Elizabeth admired her friend's ability to navigate social expectations with ease, contrasting sharply with the awkwardness of Mr. Collins's demeanor. During tea, Mr. Collins persisted in discussing Lady Catherine's opinions on marriage and propriety. Charlotte listened politely, nodding occasionally, though her mind seemed to weigh practicality over sentiment. Elizabeth, while amused, could not help but notice the subtle approval in Charlotte's expressions. Approval of order, prudence, and social strategy rather than personal happiness. As the afternoon progressed, Mr. Collins's discourse grew even more elaborate. He spoke at length about the duties of a clergyman and the moral obligations of young women in society. Elizabeth, though polite, found her attention drifting, amused by his insistence on connecting every topic to Lady Catherine's authority. Jane, ever patient, continued to respond with gentle words, maintaining a demeanor that encouraged civility. Elizabeth, in contrast, quietly observed the contrast among the guests, noting how Charlotte's practicality, Jane's kindness, and her own curiosity created a dynamic balance in the room. Elizabeth's thoughts wandered to Mr. Darcy once more. She recalled his earlier conversation, noting the difference between his forthright honesty and Mr. Collins's self-important speeches. The contrast highlighted for her the value of sincerity and the folly of excessive pride, whether in oneself or in blind reverence for social rank. Mr. Collins eventually shifted his attention to marriage prospects in the neighborhood. He spoke of various families and hypothetical matches, quoting Lady Catherine's expectations with meticulous detail. Elizabeth listened, inwardly laughing at the mechanical certainty with which he approached matters of the heart. Charlotte, recognizing the endless cycle of Mr. Collins's monologues, found subtle ways to redirect the conversation to practical matters such as household management and social decorum. Elizabeth appreciated her friend's tact, seeing how diplomacy could diffuse tedious situations without causing offense. By the end of the visit, Elizabeth reflected on the lessons embedded within these social interactions. While Mr. Collins could be trying and absurd, observing his behavior provided insights into human nature, patience, and the complexities of social expectation. The Bennet household, though occasionally strained, had grown accustomed to the peculiar rhythm of his appearances. In the days that followed, Elizabeth noticed subtle changes in her sister's behavior. Lydia grew more flirtatious, emboldened by tales of officers and society gatherings, while Mary immersed herself further in her books. Jane maintained her gentle composure, though Elizabeth detected moments of quiet concern in her expressions. Charlotte Lucas continued to be a source of practical wisdom. She advised the younger sisters on manners and social expectations, emphasizing prudence over romantic indulgence. Elizabeth respected her friend's guidance, even as she silently questioned the limits of such pragmatism. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Mr. Collins, full of elaborate praise for Lady Catherine and detailed reflections on proper conduct. Elizabeth read it with amusement, noting the contrast between his rigid formality and the warmth of real friendship and affection. As the weeks passed, Elizabeth observed more closely the dynamics of social visits. She recognized the patterns of behavior, how some sought approval, how others offered it, and how subtle gestures could communicate volumes. These observations sharpened her insight into human character, a skill she valued highly. Despite occasional tedium, Elizabeth found a certain enjoyment in the routine of society. Conversations, visits, and letters provided a framework within which she could test her own judgments, explore differences in temperament, and refine her understanding of pride, prejudice, and the delicate balance between personal desire and social expectation. One particular evening, during a gathering at the Bennet household, Elizabeth found herself seated beside a young officer recently arrived in Meryton. His stories were lively, his charm unmistakable, yet Elizabeth listened with a newfound caution. Where once she might have laughed freely, now she weighed each word, each gesture, searching for substance beneath the polish. Later, as she recounted the conversation to Jane, she noted, "There is a great difference, I think, between those who speak merely to be agreeable and those who speak with intention and sincerity." Jane listened thoughtfully, nodding in agreement, her eyes reflecting the same curiosity and discernment Elizabeth had come to admire in her sister. The days that followed brought more visitors to Longbourn, each interaction offering new lessons in observation and judgment. Elizabeth found herself mentally cataloging behaviors, noting inconsistencies, and pondering the motives behind every compliment, question, and remark. Mary, absorbed in her books, seemed largely unaffected by the social whirl, yet Elizabeth noticed the subtle ways in which even she sought recognition for her learning. Lydia and Kitty flitted about with lively energy, their conversations light and often superficial, yet not without insight into the mannerisms of the young officers who visited. Charlotte Lucas remained a steady presence, offering practical counsel and measured opinions. Her sensibility and lack of pretension provided a counterbalance to the more dramatic tendencies of the Bennet sisters, and Elizabeth valued her observations as both honest and dependable. As the month progressed, Elizabeth's understanding of social dynamics deepened. She realized that pride and prejudice were not merely personal flaws, but often reflections of societal expectation and family influence. The dance of manners, conversation, and subtle influence was as intricate and revealing as any novel she had ever read. One afternoon, Mr. Collins paid a particularly long visit, discoursing at length on the duties of a clergyman and the importance of proper conduct in society. Elizabeth listened politely, though inwardly she found his pompous manner tiresome and his self-importance almost comical. Jane, ever gracious, responded with gentle encouragement, smiling at his compliments and nodding at his observations, while Elizabeth occasionally exchanged amused glances with her mother, who seemed both entertained and exasperated by the discourse. Mr. Collins, undeterred by any lack of visible enthusiasm, continued to expound upon Lady Catherine de Bourgh's virtues, her insights, and her guidance, emphasizing the honor and advantage of aligning oneself with her favor. Elizabeth reflected quietly on the peculiarities of human behavior, recognizing that even in such tedious company, there was much to learn about character, ambition, and the subtle interplay between social expectation and personal desire. As the day drew to a close, she retired to her room with a mixture of amusement and contemplation, pondering the lessons of the afternoon and the intricate, often contradictory nature of those around her. In the days that followed, Elizabeth observed subtle changes in her sister's behavior. Jane grew more reflective, her smiles tinged with thoughtfulness, while Lydia's exuberance became even more pronounced, drawing attention wherever she went. Kitty, influenced by her elder sisters, followed suit, adopting mannerisms that seemed slightly beyond her years. Elizabeth found herself increasingly aware of her own reactions and judgments. She noticed how easily impressions could be formed and how difficult it was to separate truth from appearance. Her reflections deepened her understanding of both herself and those around her. One evening, a letter arrived from a distant acquaintance, bringing news of an engagement and stirring conversations about love, propriety, and social advantage. The Bennet household buzzed with opinion, each member interpreting the news through her own perspective, and Elizabeth listened carefully, noting the variety of responses. Charlotte Lucas, as ever, offered a practical viewpoint, suggesting that social connections and advantageous matches often outweighed mere romantic inclination. Elizabeth considered Charlotte's advice thoughtfully, weighing it against her own growing belief in sincerity and personal integrity. As the month drew to a close, Elizabeth reflected on the lessons she had gathered. Social visits, conversations, and letters had provided her with insight into character, temperament, and the complex interplay between pride, prejudice, and personal desire. She felt better prepared to navigate the world with discernment, humor, and a steady sense of self. In the days that followed, Elizabeth observed subtle shifts in the attitudes of those around her. Mr. Darcy's reserve seemed to soften in certain moments, revealing glimpses of humor and warmth that contradicted his usual aloofness. Meanwhile, Mr. Bingley maintained his cheerful disposition, his attentiveness to Jane undiminished by the social turbulence surrounding them. Elizabeth also noticed the growing influence of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whose imperious presence and sharp commentary affected the conversation at gatherings. Though her words were often designed to intimidate, Elizabeth learned to navigate these interactions with a blend of politeness and quiet assertiveness, recognizing the value of tact alongside honesty. One afternoon, a spontaneous visit brought unexpected news. An acquaintance returning from London shared observations about recent engagements and societal shifts. The Bennet sisters discussed these developments animatedly, each reaction reflecting personal hopes, fears, or curiosity. Elizabeth, ever observant, cataloged these responses, refining her understanding of motive and character. Meanwhile, Charlotte Lucas continued to embody pragmatism. Her advice, though sometimes seen as cynical, offered Elizabeth a lens through which to assess social strategy without compromising personal values. Conversations with Charlotte became opportunities to weigh idealism against reality, testing Elizabeth's own principles against the practicalities of society. As autumn settled in, Elizabeth found herself more confident in social discourse. She could engage with differing opinions, discern genuine sentiment from superficial politeness, and maintain her individuality amidst pressure to conform. The interplay of observation, reflection, and experience had sharpened her judgment, preparing her for the challenges and subtleties of the world she inhabited. Winter brought with it longer evenings, which the Bennet family often spent in quiet conversation or reading by the fire. Elizabeth found these moments conducive to introspection, reflecting not only on her sister's behavior, but also on her own evolving understanding of friendship, love, and societal expectation. Mr. Darcy, though still reserved, occasionally allowed his observations of the Bennet household to slip into conversation. Elizabeth, noticing the subtleties of his remarks, began to appreciate the depth beneath his exterior pride and the care with which he considered the feelings of others. News of visits, parties, and social gatherings continued to circulate, providing a steady stream of occasions for Elizabeth to exercise discernment. She observed the dynamics between individuals, noting instances of generosity, vanity, and hypocrisy, and gradually formed a more nuanced perspective on human character. Jane, serene and kind, continued to inspire admiration and affection, particularly from Mr. Bingley, whose attentiveness and good nature were increasingly evident. Elizabeth noted the gentle harmony between them, contrasting it with the more complicated interplay of pride and prejudice she herself navigated. By the end of the season, Elizabeth felt a sense of preparedness and resilience. The lessons of observation, reflection, and cautious engagement had equipped her to face both social expectation and personal desire with a measured confidence, balancing insight with empathy and judgment with discretion. As the spring returned, Elizabeth noticed a renewed energy among her acquaintances. Social visits became more frequent, and invitations were extended with greater enthusiasm. These occasions provided Elizabeth with opportunities to observe the interplay of personality, ambition, and social expectation, refining her understanding of human motives. Mr. Darcy, in Elizabeth's presence, exhibited a subtle warmth that contrasted with his usual formality. His occasional humor and attentiveness revealed dimensions of character that Elizabeth had not fully appreciated, prompting her to reconsider the reliability of first impressions. A letter from a distant cousin brought news of London's society and developments among mutual acquaintances. Elizabeth read with keen interest, noting the ways in which ambition and propriety shaped actions and perceptions. Her reflections allowed her to approach social interactions with a greater sense of discernment and patience. Charlotte Lucas, steadfast in her practical reasoning, reminded Elizabeth to consider security and social positioning alongside sentiment. Elizabeth weighed these lessons carefully, balancing personal principles with the pressures exerted by societal expectation, gradually honing her judgment and prudence. By early summer, Elizabeth felt a refined sense of clarity regarding social interaction and human nature. Observation, reflection, and thoughtful consideration of motives had strengthened her insight. Equipped with humor, discernment, and a measured confidence, she approached the complexities of life with both caution and anticipation. As summer progressed, Elizabeth observed the rhythms of social life with increasing attentiveness. Invitations, casual visits, and evening gatherings offered her a lens into character, revealing both generosity and vanity, sincerity and affectation in those around her. Mr. Darcy's interactions, while measured, began to show subtle signs of interest and regard. Elizabeth noted the care with which he spoke, the thought behind each gesture, and the quiet attentiveness that contrasted with his earlier reserve, prompting further reflection on her own judgments. A visit from a friend of long standing provided lively conversation and anecdotes from society in London. Elizabeth listened keenly, observing not just the stories themselves, but the attitudes and motivations behind them, refining her understanding of propriety, ambition, and social maneuvering. Charlotte Lucas, ever pragmatic, continued to offer guidance that blended sentiment with social realism. Elizabeth considered the lessons of security and personal prudence, weighing them against her own principles and the impulses of affection, striving for a balanced perspective. By the close of summer, Elizabeth felt a deepened sense of social perception. Her reflections on human behavior, combined with her own experience, strengthened her judgment. She approached future interactions with humor, patience, and discernment, ready to navigate the subtle complexities of society and personal connection. With the arrival of autumn, Elizabeth noticed a subtle shift in social energy. Visits became slightly less frequent, yet the quality of interaction deepened. Conversations were more reflective, and Elizabeth appreciated the opportunity to engage in thoughtful dialogue with friends and acquaintances. Mr. Darcy, increasingly comfortable in Elizabeth's presence, revealed layers of character that had been previously hidden. His attentiveness, discretion, and occasional witticism impressed Elizabeth, causing her to reassess prior assumptions and acknowledge the complexity beneath his exterior reserve. News from distant relatives and acquaintances brought tales of city life, achievements, and social maneuvering. Elizabeth read and reflected, noting both the admirable and the flawed in human behavior. Her understanding of ambition, pride, and virtue became more nuanced as she observed the consequences of choice and character. Charlotte Lucas, consistent in her practical guidance, reminded Elizabeth to consider both security and propriety in social interactions. Elizabeth internalized these lessons, balancing personal sentiment with social wisdom and learning to navigate expectations with discernment and patience. By the end of the season, Elizabeth felt a strengthened sense of judgment and preparedness. Her experiences, combined with careful observation, reflection, and a developing empathy, equipped her to face future social encounters with confidence, insight, and measured discretion. Winter brought with it a quiet intensity to social life. Fewer gatherings took place, but those that did were marked by deeper conversation and introspection. Elizabeth found herself drawn to these moments, appreciating the chance to engage more meaningfully with friends and family. Mr. Darcy, more at ease and less guarded, shared insights into his thoughts and feelings that surprised Elizabeth. His candidness, though still tempered by reserve, revealed a growing trust and a willingness to bridge the distance that had once seemed insurmountable. Letters from acquaintances detailed both triumphs and trials, providing Elizabeth with a broader perspective on human nature. She reflected on the interplay between societal expectation and personal ambition, learning to recognize the subtleties that influence conduct and reputation. Charlotte Lucas continued to offer pragmatic advice, encouraging Elizabeth to weigh prudence alongside passion. Elizabeth absorbed these lessons, practicing a careful balance between sincerity and decorum, and gradually mastering the art of graceful navigation through complex social networks. As the year drew to a close, Elizabeth sensed a growing maturity in her judgments and interactions. Her experiences had honed her discernment, deepened her empathy, and strengthened her confidence, preparing her to face future challenges with poise, insight, and thoughtful consideration. One particular evening, during a gathering at the Bennet household, Elizabeth found herself seated beside a young officer recently arrived in Meryton. His stories were lively, his charm unmistakable. Yet Elizabeth listened with a newfound caution. Where once she might have laughed freely, now she weighed each word, each gesture, searching for substance beneath the polish. Later, as she recounted the conversation to Jane, she noted, "There is a great difference between the ease of speech and the depth of understanding." Elizabeth's reflections revealed her growing ability to discern character and motive, an insight that would guide her interactions in the months to come. The season brought changes not only in social routines, but also in personal relationships. Friendships deepened, misunderstandings were clarified, and Elizabeth felt a steady strengthening of bonds that had once seemed tenuous or uncertain. As summer approached, Elizabeth embraced the warmth of companionship with renewed appreciation. She discovered that genuine connection required both attentiveness and patience, a combination that enriched her experiences and broadened her perspective on the human heart. By the end of the cycle, Elizabeth had matured in ways subtle yet profound. Her discernment, empathy, and confidence were now firmly established, equipping her to face future challenges with grace, insight, and a keen understanding of both herself and those around her.